Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Abdul, and you're joining the Project Management webinar series. This series isn't built for noise or vanity metrics. It's built for people who deliver senior project leaders, project managers, directors, founders, and decision makers responsible for real outcomes. From January to March, we're hosting a focused set of expert led LinkedIn live sessions where experienced professionals break down how projects, transformations, and teams are being run today, and not now how they are described in outdated playbooks. One important note: these sessions are part of a bigger journey that lead to a private in person working event at the Malaga Tech Park in March. This isn't a conference, it's a curated hands on experience for leaders who want to actively shape the future of project management and AI. The webinars give you early access to the thinking, strategies, and conversations that come together in Malaga. But more on that later. A quick thank you to the partners supporting this series: ClickUp, ActiveCampaign, Zapier, and Musent, platforms helping teams stay aligned, move faster, and scale execution without unnecessary complexity. Now, back to the webinar. Here's what to expect today: no theory only info, no copy paste presentations, and no passive listening. What you'll hear today is how to view projects and protect business value in high stakes. And you'll have space to ask questions at the end. Now, let me introduce you to today's guest. His name is Justin MacBale. Justin is a strategic leader and business advocate with more than 15 years, guiding $850 million high-stake initiatives across digital transformations, ERP implementations, and M&A post-merger integrations. He's known as the closer. He specializes in rescuing troubled projects, restoring executive confidence, and turning complexity into actionable plans that drive measurable business value. His experience spans consumer packaged goods, manufacturing, and tech industries, allowing him to align teams and stakeholders quickly while protecting intended business outcomes under real operating conditions. A serial entrepreneur, Justin founded Pregintian PM, Pragmatic and Intentional Program and Project Management, to provide delivery and coaching services. He also co founded the PM Career Growth to develop project professionals into visible business advocates. And he also created the Global M&A Integration Network, a practitioner-led community focused on digital transformation and M&A post-close execution excellence. Audiences and clients trust Justin for his pragmatic, integrity-driven approach, ability to simplify complex systems, and insights on building governance models that tie delivery directly to business results. And we have him here in our webinar. Justin, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Abdul. What a wonderfully warm invitation and introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. Appreciate the time.
Awesome, awesome. And Justin, before we dive in, three quick questions to set the stage. In a few seconds, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a program project manager that started out in sales in the DSD business, started shelving chips for Frito-Lay in grocery stores, and now I have my own personal businesses and leading complex initiatives for Fortune 500 companies.
Awesome, awesome. And how did you end up in project management? I mean, after a long journey, what was the main goal that drove you to project management?
See, I'm one of those that didn't fall into project management. I've always had an affinity towards it. When it comes to organization around large scale strategy and interdependencies, identification, and risk management, that comes back into school projects. I was identifying risks and issues to professors and all of that, and mapping out dependencies at the first day of school. So it's just something that I fell into and adopted as I grew into more of my technical prowess.
Fantastic. Yeah. And today, what kind of problem are you trying to solve through your work? So you have different projects, but it's actually what drives you the most? Because maybe you want to serve a community, a specific audience, and generally speaking, what are the bigger problems that you're trying to solve?
So I would say that I'm solving two fronts. The first is around the project management community as a whole, of
Mhm.
having different kinds of difficult conversations that are around our industry, and also all of the practices challenging existing status quos and deep diving into bigger topics than just the superficial role definition. And on the business front, I'm working to maximize intended business value for projects where projects have lost their value either through execution or poor strategy definition.
Okay, and I'm really looking forward for your presentation.
Thank you. All right.
So yeah, so today Justin will be speaking about modern project management. I'm sure that for people managing stalled initiatives, leading M&A integrations, or trying to protect business value when projects are politically exposed, this will be highly relevant. So yeah, Justin, feel free to share your screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Abdul. All right.
Awesome.
All right. So, modern project management. In conjunction with PM Career Growth and the project management teams, we're going to take a look at the ideas and skills that you need in order to lead in 2026 and beyond. First, thank you, Abdul, for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to the project management field. As we talked about, I have an eclectic career journey that started in sales, moved into IT consulting, into post-merger integration work, and then back into IT consulting for Fortune 500 companies. I'm a speaker, a teacher, a coach, and a mentor. For giving back to the community has always been the priority of my, I guess we'll call it mantra. And as we've talked about before, I have worked in 10 plus Fortune 500 companies and spanned across these industries: software technology, manufacturing, and consumer packaged goods. Now, modern project management requires a mindset shift. And there are 5 different elements that I want to cover here today that I want you all to walk away with. First is the concept of what a project manager is and what are the misconceptions. The second is around role definition of the, sorry, not role definition, the project definition. Many people are using the word, what is a project? And we have existing definitions here, but how does that tie in relation to business value? The third is around the concept of constraint management, another existing and prevalent topic around what a project manager does and how it pertains to realizing intended business value. The penultimate item that we'll cover here today is around the project lifecycle, understanding what it is at a high level that the project goes through and how we change the way that we look at this life cycle to modernize it and also build business advocacy. The final piece is around 10 modern skills that you need to learn in 2026 to be both competitive in the workforce and also to insulate yourself against technological advancements. Before I continue forward, I want to give a shout out to everybody in the chat. Thank you for all of your kind words, and let's get started. So, the role of a project manager is not project support. How many of you, raise your hands or emote in the chat, have heard this phrase? A project manager manages tasks, scope, stakeholders, budget, timelines, identifies risks and issues, and generates reports. What you're going to find is that none of these are related to leadership or strategy. It is more on the execution element, and it's more tied to project support. you're going to find that many of these responsibilities actually lie with a project admin, a project analyst, and a project coordinator. The problem is that in most projects, you're not going to have the funding for project support. So what that means is, as a project manager, by necessity, you still have to do these activities, but the project manager is now responsible for them because they have no one else to delegate towards them. So when you understand that these are the misconceptions of what a project manager is, and the fact that there's no funding to take on these roles, this is why there's a common misconception that a project manager is a glorified admin, because this is what people pay attention to. But let's change the spectrum. Let's change the narrative. Project managers are protectors and facilitators to capture intended business value. Now, you read this on the screen, and the first thing you say is, well, Justin, that's pretty fluffy. So let's expand a little bit more on that. First, a project manager is a curator of timely information. They are working with informal and formal networks to gather information in order for you to have a pulse on the project all throughout the entire life cycle. For if you don't have the correct and timely information, you can't facilitate action on it. You can't raise awareness. And that right there is already going to erode intended business value. The second is around facilitator of timely business decision making. What we need to understand is project managers do not have the authority to make business decisions on a general basis. There are exceptions, of course, but mostly project managers are not the ones that are making the decisions. They're helping to build the decision-making process, either through the governance or through raising issues to the business themselves and providing options and trade-offs. The third is around the recommendation piece. So a project manager isn't just gathering information and funneling it around or just pitching ideas for the business to make decisions. They're providing recommendations as well, either through the discussion with subject matter experts or through their own personal experience and insights that they've had in tangential projects. This fourth element is what often gets missed or just generalized. Project managers lead teams and build capabilities. You are not just looking at leading teams to execute, but you're building their skills and capabilities for long-term growth. That includes understanding business functionality and also for scalability and self-management. The fifth is around project managers need to review upstream and downstream cross-functional dependencies. Say that 5 times fast. But the idea here is that a project manager isn't tunnel visioned in regards to how they evaluate projects in the modern world. They have to look at the entire ecosystem of the project itself and how that ties to the value that is to be realized, which ties again to the penultimate bullet here, which is we don't look at projects in isolation, but in the organization as a whole. Now, projects aren't in a vacuum. You've heard me say that for about 1.5 years. Projects inherit what is existing in an organization, the culture, the history, the processes, the policies, the organizational chart in terms of reporting structure. All of these come into play, as well as any of the political elements. And a project manager needs to look at the project in the short run and the long run in order for them to operate within that organization. This leads to the final bullet, which is a project manager cannot and will not neglect the concept of optics and politics. It doesn't matter if a project manager helps facilitate a team to realize the intended business value if no one believes that's true. In other words, how things are perceived on the progress of the project and the closure of the project all are just as important as the execution itself. Because if you don't have the backing or the support or the accolades or the acknowledgement, politics plays a big role in this, where you understand that organizations, they are all driven by personal, departmental, and or we'll call it group agendas. People are driven for performance management to improve their careers, improve their personal lives, and how you layer that in terms of decision making and analysis is important as a project manager. Now that we understand that what a project manager is supposed to be doing, let's talk about the concept of projects. Projects are built for business survival. Here is the common phrases that you're finding about the definition of a project. A temporary initiative in a unique context undertaken to create value. Now, if you look, temporary, unique context, and value come jumping right out. You read this sentence and you're like, oh, well, anything can be a project then. And that is where we have a problem. When we need to define what that word value means, and we have 4 different levers that a business needs in order to survive. If these levers are not realized in some way, shape, or form that tie to the bottom line, cash flow, then the organization will cease to exist. And projects are meant in order to leverage one of these 4 levers. The first is either increasing or protecting revenue. The second is around controlling or managing, mitigating costs. The third is around liability and risk management. And the fourth is around increasing, maintaining, or changing strategic position in the marketplace. Let's deep dive a little bit into each one. Under revenue, these are examples in which you can have introducing new products or services, or improving customer experience, which leads to increased customer retention, attracting or going after new markets or customer segments, pricing, improving pricing, packaging, or monetization models. These pieces right here are important for when you layer decisions, trade-offs, conversations with the business and becoming a business advocate as a project manager. This is what you need to understand at a fundamental level, especially for revenue. Now, when we look at cost, we look at process optimization, standardization, reduction in waste or cycle times or throughput. There's also automation opportunities or system modernization. You're looking at old archaic systems that are causing a lot of problems in terms of your overhead, your maintenance, and now you want to modernize them. There's also procurement consolidation, working to work with vendors in order to create bundling or increase your leverage because you have buying power or reducing the supplying power within the marketplace. The piece here around costs is that you're looking to try to reduce the expenses, whether it's material, labor, overhead, or any of the other types of the expenses that are incurred in the business. And some projects are targeted towards that. The third is around liability and risk, specifically around security, safety, regulatory, and compliance, as well as updating infrastructure, protecting reputations, and reducing reputational damage, governance, and controls. When you're looking at liability and risks, you're looking at it in 2 different fronts. First is around the concept of the fiscal or the financial impact. In other words, penalties, damages, lawsuits, and also the reputational, the goodwill that's related to the company, its branding, its employer branding opportunities. And we have, finally, strategic position. Some projects are built to build partnerships or enabling mergers and acquisitions and capability and scope expansion or repositioning in the marketplace. For when you're working within an industry, an organization is trying to be competitive, differentiate itself within its marketplace in order to increase revenue, reduce costs, and ultimately survive. These are all different, the 4 main levers that you need to understand in modern project management. You can't talk about projects if you're not tying it to one of these 4 levers. And how you frame decision-making, opportunities, options, trade-offs, impact, Probability should be tied to one of these four elements in the short run and in the long run. Now that we understand what a project manager is supposed to do, and we understand what a project is, let's talk a little bit more around the concept of constraint management. We hear this a lot, which is maintain the constraints and you are good as a project manager. But constraint management is not enough. I'll say that again. Constraint management is not enough. Sustainable value must be maximized. We're all familiar with the iron triangle or the triple constraint in project management: scope, time, cost. These are the three different factions, if you will, that all impact the center, which is around project quality. When this model was designed, it was meant to be trade-offs in relation to quality. And that is one of the misconceptions around the use of this particular iron triangle. So if you reduce the time and you want to maintain the quality, then you have to either increase costs or reduce scope. These are we'll call them interrelationships between these three items. But the problem is that constraints are defined and agreed to before even the project manager is involved. You have a business case. You then have the project that's accepted, and none of these three items are within the project manager's purview to control. So even if the scope, the time, and the costs were under each of the targeted times, that doesn't mean that you've realized the value that was intended, and it doesn't maximize the value either. We look at the iron triangle in itself, and we see that there have been evolutions from various different bodies of work or entities. Here is one of the more modern models that came into play, which is the constraints have expanded to 6. And you can see quality, time, risk, scope, resources, and cost. But again, it does not fundamentally address the concept that project managers have no control over these constraints. They have to work with the business to address them because the business defined them and only the business can change them. So we build a new model. We build a model that is constrained around the idea that all of these elements, these constraints, are value levers. There are 5 of them: people, governance, cost, resources, and solution. Excuse me. And where you are in the process depends in various different concepts. Let me explain this a little bit further, but let me deep dive into each of these main levers first. So under the people element, you have culture, which is the organizational culture, how decisions are made, how people behave in terms of either hiding information or sharing information. Are they innovative? Are they more hierarchical? These are different elements that can drive how much value can be realized in a project, especially when it contains to adoption. Is there enough maturity in the organization that the project's goals and outcomes that are to be realized are willing to be adopted? And does the project have operational readiness incorporated into it? In other words, when the project is completed, is it going to make sure that the business is ready and can continue to sustain continuity, that there are no business interruptions, and it does not harm the 4 levers of the business? Again, revenue, costs, liability and risks, and strategic positioning. That's the first lever, people. The second lever is governance, and that has to do with how decisions are being made. Do we identify risks and issues? Do we let them linger? How we identify risks and issues? Do we take them seriously? Is there a sense of urgency? How we address scope? Is the scope prioritized based on the minimum viable product? Is it based on the intended business outcomes? Is there an urgency to it? Are there some kind of logical approaches? And that ties again to the prioritization. Do priorities matter in terms of magnitude and impact? Or are we looking at priorities based on preference or other metrics that aren't in place? How governance is enabled within an organization and a project impact the amount of realization value that you can have within the project itself. The third is around costs, recognizing that there are operational expenditures and capital expenditures. Operational being operating expenses towards materials, labor, overhead, maintenance. And capital expenditures are around asset investments that are for long-term use, whether it's buildings, equipment, licenses, platforms. All of these come into play, and how much is being used, again, impacts the intended business value, for there is a return on investment that needs to be considered. The fourth element is around resources, time, skills, capabilities, intellectual property, technology. All of the resources that are at the disposal of the organization can either minimize or increase the intended business value to be captured. How much time is dedicated? How much what is the word? Uninterrupted time. Do we have the skills and the capabilities of the team members in order to realize this value, or are there skill gaps and we need to either look elsewhere with vendors, or we need to skill up our team for long-term maximized value realization? Intellectual property. Are there any protections in place for the value that we want to realize in order to protect our moat, if you will, of competitive differentiation and market positioning? And then there's also technology. Do we have the technology that we need in order to be successful, in order to realize the intended business value? This leads to the final element, which is around solution. Solution itself is comprised of quality, holistic design, and safety and compliance. Specifically, we all know already about quality. That's part of the original Iron Triangle. How the quality of a project and all of its deliverables or the outcomes that are to be realized impact the amount of value that can be realized. If there is a low quality, that's more rework that impacts all of the other value drivers as well. Delays, costs, and also the prioritization and the operational readiness. We then lead into the holistic design. Does the solution itself address everything that's needed within the business? It's not just the project scope. And this is important because we get to this concept a lot, which is scope creep. And people say scope creep is bad, we need to protect it. But here, scope if you find new scope that needs to be added that addresses the holistic design, that's important and encouraged. Now, of course, as a project manager, you don't have the authority to increase scope. You still have to go to the business. But the ability to have a holistic design that realizes intended business value is critical. And what do I mean by holistic design? You're looking at dotted line relationships within the organization of work streams, workflows, applications, integrations, and all of the elements that are in place. The final piece is around safety and compliance. And this has to do with, depending on the type of project that you're in, whether you are adhering to the compliance and the safety regulations that are in play. For if you are not, then this can impact all of the other value drivers and elongate the entire project. Now, the thing to point out here is that of these 5 main levers, the degree and the timing of when to increase these or lower them will be based on the business context and the project life cycle. In other words, if you're at the planning stages, then some of these have a little bit more emphasis, especially operational readiness. And others will have more importance as you lead towards the end of the project. And this is why you need to understand that constraint management isn't enough. You have to think about the project and the organization as value levers: people, governance, cost, resources, and solution. Now that we've talked about constraint management, let's talk about the business context that we talked about. Business context changes rapidly. People leave the organization, new technologies emerge, strategies change within the organization, or you even have new information that's found out that wasn't in the original understanding of the project. For example, there is a new or legacy system that wasn't identified, or there's tribal knowledge from one of the team members that wasn't documented in the workflows, and there are workarounds. These are all things that can change the way that a project is viewed and how it should be executed. This is why a robust strategy and governance is required. What do I mean by that? Here we look at a project lifecycle that I personally use. Now, I want you to pay attention here, not to the specific names, but the thematic elements behind them. If you look, we first start with a project acceptance, long before a project manager is engaged often. We then need to realize what the intended business value is. We identify that value. We define the scope. We then work to establish the strategy and governance. Strategy and governance around the exit criteria, the tools, the roadmap, the RACI, the decision-making framework, all have to be put into place. And then we create an initial plan based on our current assumptions of the project and the scope. This next 3 stages are where we see in the blue that are in a perpetual cycle. For you execute on the plan that is initiated so far, you monitor and report on the status, and if there are any risks or issues or changes, you replan and redesign the project accordingly. This again goes to changing business context, and it's in a perpetual cycle until you reach the point where you're deploying to the final stage. That final stage is around support and business stabilization, whether it's hypercare in a technical fashion or a punch list in construction. And the idea is here you have a laundry list of items where there are defects or issues that need to be resolved in order to not interrupt business operations and for businesses to continue to survive. The final piece here in the stages is to close the project. And now closing the project isn't just looking at the deliverables, making sure that the intended business value is there, but that the teams that are required to maintain these services or maintain the outcome of this project are enabled. They are enabled in the sense of understanding that how to manage each of the different facets of the project, and they have the knowledge transfer and the lessons learned in order to do that. We've talked through the different 8 stages, but I want to highlight a few things here. What you'll notice is there is no project approach. There's no methodology that's tied here. You can use agile, you can use hybrid, you can use waterfall, or whatever else you want to use under the umbrella of the project methodologies. This is methodology agnostic intentionally because it's emphasizing some key elements that are missing when it talks about the project lifecycle. And the first is around strategy and governance. Whether you are in a PMO or whether you are not in a PMO and you're just managing the project yourself as a project manager, you need to co-create the strategy and governance. Why is this important? Because when you are creating the strategy and governance with the business, that's buy-in. That's buy-in right there, that people agree to the decision making. And why is that important? That's important because when you're here, things are calm. There's calm waters, there's no urgency, there's no crisis. But when you have to leverage the strategy and governance model in the future, when you're in that blue perpetual cycle and you see that there needs to be a change because the context has shifted, you then already have the rules and the guidelines in place so that you can remove the noise that comes into emotional, the political, all of that. You've already got the logic and the framework built into place in order to realize these changes fast and also tie it back to the intended business value so that it is value driven. Now, the thing about creating an initial plan, and I've harped on this, I think, twice here so far, you are building a plan. You're identifying the sequence of tasks, the dependencies, who is being assigned, and the due dates that are related to the tasks. But this is based on your current understanding of the project. When you had the project charter or whatever documentation that you want to use, you are built off of a set of assumptions. These are the work streams. These are the stakeholders. This is the current state. And if any of that were to change, you will not be able to build the plan yet for that reason either. That is why we have this iterative cycle in the middle. So the stage 3 is critical that you understand you're building a plan based on the current assumptions and context of the organization and the project. I'll give you an example. If for whatever reason, a new project transformation happens for, let's say, HR, and you're working with HR for upgrade, but this digital transformation project wasn't mapped out in the dependencies or in the overall consideration for design, then you're going to have to replan the project. You need to figure out if there's any sync issues, if there's going to be timing issues, because now they're updating a system that you were using the system for another business project. And only understanding that that is a limitation of the initial plan is needed. You need to level set that with the business. You need to have them sign off on that plan, knowing full well that things can change. And then you will leverage your change control mechanisms that are in place. This is the emphasis around this entire project management lifecycle. Execute the plan, but monitor for the changes and iterate however you need to. If there is a new regulatory compliance that's driven by the industry, do you need to include that in the project plan that wasn't assumed before? There's a new department chair, and they weren't included in the conversation, and they have a part of the work stream. Do you need to include them and reprioritize things? These are all important elements to consider. The entire project manager, a modern project manager, focuses on business continuity and stabilization. That is why I have always emphasized this stage 2. Strategy and governance is key to all of it. No matter what changes in your project world, no matter what changes in the organization, when you have a defined set of rules for what the priorities are and how you categorize them, you figure out who the decision makers are, where the escalation criteria is, and what the escalation paths are as well, and how we measure the concept of success, you are already halfway there. This is one of the most important things that I personally do not see emphasized in project management textbooks that I want to impart on you all today. Strategy and governance is key. Robust is the key word here, though. Robust meaning that things are strong enough to handle change, stressors, and crises. Now, this is probably the part that you've all been waiting for. We've talked about a project manager's role. We've talked about what a project is and how it ties to the 4 survivals of the business. And we've also talked about the constraint management myths and how we need to change how we look at reviewing the success of projects. And the penultimate piece, we talked about how I view projects in a life cycle and the emphasis around strategy and governance. Here are 10 modern skills that you need to learn in order to be competitive in the marketplace, especially with technology evolutions such as AI. The first is around business acumen and should come to no surprise to anyone here who knows me. You need to understand that projects are a mechanism for business survivability. That means you need to know financial literacy. What is the difference between with revenue and expenses, and how to understand the profit and loss statement. Why? Because organizations are driven by profit and loss statements. The departments are measured against it. Leadership is also measured against it, and how it impacts their ability will determine what way you need to structure their thinking. There's cognitive biases that are in place as well. But it's not just being able to read financial statements such as the cash flow, the balance sheet and the income statement, or the profit and loss, but it's around business processes. And I'm not just talking about process flows. I'm specifically talking about understanding the value streams within a business. You have a business that has operations, sales, finance, accounting, HR, IT, marketing. All of these different pieces come into play, and you need to understand the risks that are associated, the interdependencies within the different departments, and the key stages within these business processes. Why? How can you be a protector and facilitator of business value if you can't even understand what the business is trying to do and how a project ties to that? The third is around market awareness. In business acumen, you need to understand that projects are not just in their own little bubble. They're sitting in an ivory tower somewhere. They operate within an organization. An organization operates within a marketplace, and the marketplace is a bunch of industry forces. You need to be aware of all of these pieces. The Porter's five forces, SWOT analysis, all of these pieces come into play. That's the first skill. The second skill is around systems thinking, interconnectedness, causality, emergence, boundaries. Now, these are a lot of words that I don't commonly use either, but interconnectedness leads to the concept of upstream and downstream dependencies. How do things flow together? Where are they impacted? If I change the data flow of one item, how does it impact the rest of the entire project? And where does it impact what business functions? Causality. If I do X, what happens in Z? There are, we call it what if statements, but it's more around the concept of how much change happens and how it impacts the rest of the project and the organization itself. There's also emergence, and this is important. The word emergence, and I had to look this up myself, which is that you're not just looking at things in isolation, but in a collective amount of tasks, issues, relationships, or structures, how those impact behaviors and boundaries. What is in scope? What is out of scope? How does that relate to the overall ecosystem of a business? That's the second skill. The third skill is around data governance. Why is this important? Because organizations are moving towards a data-driven culture. Everything is going to be in a timely decision-making fashion. You're looking at the architecture, the quality, the security, and the compliance that are all related to data, as well as the data strategy that is in place. Again, these sub-bullets that you're looking at on the screen, they're not an exhaustive list, but to get you started in understanding, oh, I need to be aware of these skills because these aren't talked about enough. The fourth item is technology fluency. Now, technology fluency is not just for IT people. In other words, IT project managers or technical project managers. But if you're working within an industry that has some sort of workflow automation, leverages cloud integration, software applications, or requires the software development lifecycle, you need to be aware of all of these. And if you are not working in a field where there is any technology that's being used, great. Then focus on the techniques that are related to the industry. When it comes to construction, understanding the processes, all of the documentation, and all of the tools, the manual tools that are used, such as the cranes and the operations and the diggers, such as these examples. You need to be aware of the fluency of the tools that you are using within your industry. Sorry, I want to go back to the software development lifecycle for a second, because most organizations are going towards that data-driven culture. They're also going towards data product-driven approaches. They're not just going to be providing services or tangible products, but their data is also going to be a product one day. And you need to be able to understand the software development lifecycle. Why? Because as a project manager, you're going to be helping to do requirements gathering, software testing, deploying to different environments. And if you're not, then you're still going to be working with a project manager who does. And it's important that you understand that because you're living in a technologically driven world. Now, of course, no surprise here, artificial intelligence. But I differ a little bit more around this concept. It's not about whether to use artificial intelligence or whether you use it or don't use it will replace you, or those who use it and will replace you. None of that. Artificial intelligence and understanding what predictive analytics means, how you can predict different outcomes or analyses based on the data that's available, how you can generate content or insights, and the concept of machine learning, training models based on the data. You don't have to be a data scientist, but you should understand the fundamentals of artificial intelligence. What are the limitations? What are the pros and cons to using them? How they impact you as an organization and as an individual. And finally, you have also the agentic systems. These are things in place that you need to know. This should come to no surprise here. We've alluded to it perpetually throughout this presentation, but change management. I'm not asking you all to become change management practitioners, but I'm telling you, you need to have a fundamental understanding of change management, what operational readiness means. That's including training, documentation, skills assessments, impact assessments, communication plans, all of the different things that come into place that you need to understand. Why? Because no matter what project that you're in, you are driving some sort of change. And that change is not going to stick, then your value is dead. Emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, relationship management. You're dealing with people all the time in project management. No matter what stage you're in, you're working with team members, with vendors. You need to be aware of what your triggers are and where your strengths lie. You also need to be able to self-regulate, because how you portray yourself impacts your ability to build trust and rapport. And empathy is part of that skill as well. Finally, under emotional intelligence is around social skills, relationship management, because as a project manager, you'll hear this a lot, and you've heard this for about a year and a half from me. Influence without authority. You can tell that project managers have no authority in the broad scheme of things. They are trying to leverage decision. They're trying to influence decisions or facilitate decisions, and they are gathering information in order to do it. But they need to be able to build and sustain relationships. We also have political awareness. I cannot tell you how many times project managers have failed here around the concept that you can do a great job, but if no one perceives that it either as the project manager or leader or in the team, it doesn't matter, because perception is reality. And you need to be able to de-escalate situations and handle all of the departmental tensions whenever you're working in cross-functional relationships, while also building a coalition. Social networks are absolutely key. You need to be able to leverage these networks whenever you need to build temporary authority, or also to circumvent any political landmines. This is something I've had to personally learn over the last 15 plus years, and I have seen so many project managers get this wrong because it's not emphasized enough. We have executive presence, how you show up digitally in a room, how you show up physically, with your composure, your decorum, and being able to build credibility through your follow through, the language that you use, the ability to articulate your logic and your thought process to build in buy-in, and the confidence in order to do it. These are pieces that you need in order to be successful as a modern project manager. And finally, multi-methodology awareness. You are not living in a world where everybody goes into Agile, everybody uses Scrum, everyone is using waterfall or hybrid. There are combinations all around here. And remember this, I swear I want you all to remember this. No matter where you are as a PMO, a project manager, or a leader in project management, you are literally tied to the organization and the decisions they make. Sure, as you get broader into your organization and leadership impact, you might be able to influence these. But for now, you are tied to whatever exists in the process, in the organization itself, and you adopt to it, or you modify it based on the scope and the structures that are in place. You have a bunch of vendors that are all agile, and your waterfall, well, you better be looking at a hybrid option. If not, just all going to one model. You have to be able to understand the pros and cons to these methodologies in order for you to tailor the approach to the business context. Now, I've talked at you all for an incredibly long amount of time. I want to thank each and every one of you for your ongoing support. The chat itself, I've been seeing, thank you very much. And here's a few things that I would leave you with. First is if you want to learn more about post-merger integration M&A work, you can check out a podcast where I was with Clint and the Master Your Merger podcast. We also have the Global Mergers and Acquisition Integration Network, which is a LinkedIn group that you can join today to talk about either M&A or digital transformation. We also have in our PM Career Growth, we've launched a membership program where you will be able to take lessons and learn more in detail around the lessons that I'm teaching you here. These are all very high level. We go into much more detail and practical examples that you can take for your future career. I want you, Elizabeth wants you, my co-business partner here, to be successful in being more strategically visible and a better business advocate for your career. On the PM Career Growth side in the social media, we have a LinkedIn, an Instagram, a TikTok, a YouTube, a Threads, and an X. You can find us also on our podcasts that we host as well. These are great for you to understand. And finally, we have Prevention PM, which is around career management. Pragmatic and intentional program and project management. I can either coach you to become more of a business advocate one-on-one, or we can look at teaching your organization. And also we can have fractional or full-time delivery services. And with that, I'll give it back to you, Abdul. Thank you.
Awesome, Justin. That was fantastic, exceptionally clear, and yeah, grounded in reality. The way you put it, I mean, for me personally, I think your emphasis on protecting business value rather than just tracking deliverables, it was just spot on. Because in too many organizations, projects become isolated from the strategic intent that justified them in the first place. And your approach of treating project management as a business advocacy, not just task coordination, because sometimes project managers lose themselves and they feel a little bit lost. And what actually the senior leaders want is project managers that are able to transition to a bigger overview of the whole organization, of the whole mission, align those goals. Amazing. I'm going to open it up for questions. I'm not sure if anyone has a specific question.
I felt like I was preaching. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this subject.
Actually, no, you were very relaxed and very open as well, because with your 15 years of experience, I think we've learned a lot. For example, picking up on the 10 modern skills, I think you were very clear on how project managers need to be aware of, the business context, how technology is evolving, how we should build systems. Actually, I would like to ask you about technology fluency. That one of the points that you emphasize. What is the
Sure.
best way, in your opinion, for project manager to be always up to date with the new updates, with the new technology that they can use in their own work, but also be aware that things that can have an impact on the future of their work?
Well, that's quite a loaded question. We're definitely all of our own advocates for our personal learning. I would definitely encourage you, if there are any webinars, take advantage of them. I'm not a big proponent of just taking certifications for the sake of it, but if it's valuable to you, take a certification to demonstrate your expertise. And also you have thought leadership that are around that can provide you additional insight. If not, just look at your own organization and your project ecosystem. If there are tools that are being leveraged that you don't know about, raise your hand, volunteer, or do your own self-research. There are plenty of opportunities out there, especially when it comes to software and applications.
Awesome, awesome. Actually, I really, yeah, it was really a smart decision, I would say, to pick up some examples, like for example the one about HR when there is a regulatory compliance that has not been considered. Um, have you actually experienced more of these situations in your in your journey of project manager?
So when it comes to regulatory pieces, they take longer. I use them as an example, but it's very unlikely. I've only run across it once where I was a Scrum Master for custom web development. And I was also the project manager at the time. And it had to do with GDPR compliance and how it had just come out, and we were just insulating our clients ahead of time. So we started to build some additional links and functionality to opt out. We did some research there, but it's very uncommon for a regulatory change to drive an immediate change in the project, but it will drive immediate discussion and it may reprioritize the rest of the roadmap. I do see a question from Christopher, by the way, Abdul.
Okay, yeah, good. Let me check. Okay, is not coming.
Okay, I'll read it.
Yeah. Feel free to read it.
How do you see the role of PMO evolving within a hub and spoke operating model as organizations move from a bimodal or product line structures in an AI-driven environment? Well, that's a hefty question. I will not digress from that. But let me unpack a few things. So hub and spoke model in regards is going back and forth. For people who aren't aware, it's an inefficient model. And also when it comes to bimodal or product line structures, so some structures are based on the way that products are originated, and also the AI-driven piece. Okay, so PMO, I think the biggest problem with PMOs have always been that they tend to look at their body of work as more of a governance and an standardization enforcement. If we want to move away from that, then we're going to probably need to regulate some of the mundane activities with AI. However, AI is going to be only as strong as the data that's involved. And there are many limitations with AI when it comes to having different data that's in different sources. You have emails, you have spreadsheets, you have sticky notes, you have things in people's minds that aren't codified. And so the role of PMO evolving, regardless of how the organization is structured, is going to be based on how well they involve the data-driven culture and how well they build a data strategy that enables timely decision-making. And the PMO's movement towards that business advocacy piece, such as the one that I've emphasized here today, is towards that. It's not looking at things at a task level. It's not thinking of things on a standardization level either. We're looking at them in a more broader and ecosystem perspective. And if business organization structures do not enable that, then we need to revisit it. Of course, we can't look at silos and shadow IT either. But I hope that answers your question, Christopher. I know that was a pretty long-winded answer.
Awesome. I've got here a question from Dean Lambert. For PMs who are interviewing, what is, in your opinion, the key message we need to tell our hiring manager?
Oh, okay. Well, I will tell you this, and I will say this to all the hiring managers. You have the ability to have transferable skills if you can highlight them in relation to the industry or the specific expertise that's required. You can't just go straight from going into healthcare into construction. It's not that easy, and especially in this hyper competitive world. But hiring managers need to be able to discern the difference between potential and also existing plug and play. More often than not, hiring managers will go for the plug and play, but there are people with high potential, people who just need to be given a chance and be given just enough resources to get them going. There are proactive enough people that can do that.
Fantastic. Let me see if there are. If you have questions, feel free.
I see two more.
Okay.
So Zahir asks, do you think PMs sometimes slip into task execution because they don't spend enough time understanding business context? Yes, but also because of how projects are structured. Ben, thanks for jumping in. I appreciate it. And I know that you had a great lunch and learn as well. So good to you as well. The idea here is that people slip into task execution for two reasons. The first is not understanding the business, so they can't talk about anything else. The second is the structure of the organization itself is not realizing the value that project managers bring. And it goes back to how we reviewed as project managers as a support role, because there are no support roles under the project manager for funding purposes. So people fall back on that naturally. Sorry, I've noticed strong PMs look at strategic matter outcomes while lacking insight to push the role. So the other piece, Zahir, is going to be that we're not just looking at the business context in processes and expertise in functions, but it's also the organization as a whole. When you figure out that businesses have to make money, and I don't mean profit, I mean they need to make money to pay for the expenses. So whether it's a nonprofit or not, they have to have enough cash to sustain themselves for the next venture. Michael Smolin asks, how would you approach applying concepts reviewed here in the center of excellence construct with either a centralized PMO or formalized democratic pockets of PMs within business units? That's a great one. I'm going to leave you with this big piece of advice, Michael. I wish that I could put these into organizations, but you need to be careful. If people do not align with your vision, you're going to create a huge target on your back. This is where political awareness is key. You can start to pitch the idea in smaller groups with people that you trust within the organization and see if you can build a coalition to drive that change, but you can't do it yourself. You shouldn't do it yourself, because then you look like you're a dissenter. You are also challenging the status quo, which has their own personal agendas behind it. And also you become a disruptor. There is this concept that I'm not asking you to be silent, but be strategic about it. You can pitch ideas without putting a target on your back. I have done that numerous times. And in PM Career Growth, in our lessons on demand, we talk about how to build temporary authority for you to leverage those kinds of changes. Okay. I think the last comment is from Zahir. As an M&A activity becomes more predictable and almost continuous, how are organizations shifting from day one mindset to treating M&A as ongoing operating model with sustained governance, resourcing, and leadership attention? That's a very hefty question, Zahir. I want to be honest. More people tend to have that day one and day 100 mindset than the opposite. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to tackle that on my own. I will need ongoing support. I know that there shouldn't be a timeline, but M&A has transactional services agreements that drive a lot of the urgency because we don't want to pay long-term penalties for legacy support. However, if we want to continue to change the way that we review our mindset around how we handle M&A organizations or projects, then it starts with you, and it starts with building a coalition around you. Similar to the question that was given by Michael Smolin as well.
Amazing. I think, these were the ingredients of, any project manager that is taking your advice is going to be, full prepared to jump on and their game tomorrow.
They're definitely going to be standing out in a marketplace that talks about execution and all of the support roles. I encourage you all to spread the word, so it's not just me. I spent the last year and a half talking about it silently and being told that I don't know what I'm talking about. So please do me a solid and spread the word.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think this has been amazing, Justin. Yeah, before we wrap up, if you were starting a project today, what are the key things you'd focus on from day one? Just just
Okay.
curious.
First is going to be to talk to people. So figure out what it is that their assumptions are, their priorities. So building those relationships up from the get-go. The second is around strategy and governance. I cannot emphasize that enough. When you start to build that, things become so much easier. And the third is around really honing in around that intended business value, really understanding what the outcomes are to be realized and tying everything together with that.
Awesome. What are your go-to project management tools and why?
Jira is my number one go-to tool, and I'll tell you why. I work mostly with complex and large organizations, so they already have it embedded in different pockets. And so it's easier to just leverage an existing tool, especially since the enterprise version is so versatile. You can create reports, self-serving dashboards, and you can also tailor and export to do pivot tables. The second piece is around the application tools that plug into Jira. I use a tool called Zephyr. I don't know if it's still available, but the last time I used it, Zephyr was a test management tool that allows you to upload a bunch of test cases, and then it ties into a dashboard for reporting. So that enterprise. However, I will be honest, Abdul, I've used ClickUp, I've used Rike, I've used Smartsheet. Those are all good and well as well, but I am more what is the word? I gravitate towards Jira because I've used that the most often.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Whatever works for you, and you need to feel comfortable with your tools. And yeah, actually, I never heard about that plugin. I will check it out and we'll let you know.
Of course, yeah. But remember, I
Yeah.
want to emphasize this, that when we're in projects, that we absorb whatever is the standard tools. I've had the opportunity to pitch a new tool for M&A deals because we have that ability. But when it comes to large enterprise deals like ERP implementations, you're going to use the tool that they have. They're not going to let you
Yeah.
go use another third-party vendor. That's just inefficient, and that involves procurement and all of that.
Yeah. No, definitely. Now, I might be asking you the most difficult question of this webinar. If you had more time, which
Sorry, go ahead.
which area outside of project management would you focus on, and what draws you to it?
I'm going to answer it in two ways. One, I wish I could have been a lawyer or a surgeon, as I really enjoy that. Lawyer for the legal arguments and logic.
Yeah.
Surgeon because I like to help people. So now we tie those together and we build that. I would love to be a teacher. I would love to host more courses, be at speaker events, and just share insights and wisdoms from the various different missteps that I've had in my career. And there have been many.
No, Justin. No, I think you've been amazing so far, and thank you very much for coming to the webinar. Been awesome, and I hope we can have more of this, in the next future as well.
Thank you, Abdul. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to be hosted by the project management teams. And thank you to all of our guests that have continued to support me as well. I hope that this has been valuable. If you have any other questions, drop them in this either LinkedIn Live, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn and we can go from there.
Awesome. So thank you, folks. Thank you, everyone, for being here. A quick reminder, this session is part of the project management webinar series running from January to March, leading into our in-person working event at the Malaga Tech Park in Spain, running between the 25th and the 26th of March. And I hope to see you all there. If today's conversation resonated, Malaga is where it comes together. We'll be hosting more webinars in this series. We'll actually have a very interesting one tomorrow already at 2 p.m. GMT with Eva Delhomme. So stay tuned, register for the upcoming webinars, and make sure to follow the project management team's newsletter to stay ahead of upcoming speakers, topics, and event updates. Thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, and I'll see you everyone in the next session. Thank you.